June 13, 1944. A country road east of Villers-Bocage, deep in the hedgerow country of Normandy, 1 week after D-Day. A British armored column sits nose to tail on the highway to Caen, engines idling, hatches open in the morning sun. These are the Desert Rats, the 7th Armored Division, the men who chased Rommel across North Africa. This morning they are trying to slip around the side of the German line and pull the whole front loose. The lead tanks have pushed up to a low ridge called Point 213. The infantry are strung out along the road below them, close enough to the hedges on either side to reach out and touch the leaves. Nobody is worried. The town behind them was taken without a shot. Then, from a treeline barely 50 yards off the road, a single German heavy tank rolls out onto the tarmac, swings its long gun toward the head of the column and fires. In the next 15 minutes, 1 tank and 5 men are going to gut the vanguard of a British division. This is how it happened. To understand that road, you have to understand what had gone wrong for the British in the week since the landings. The plan for Normandy had called for the city of Caen to fall on the first day. It did not. The Germans dug in hard around it, and the British advance stalled in front of a place they were supposed to have taken by nightfall on the 6th of June. Then a gap opened in the German line further west, near Caen, and the British saw a chance. They would send an armored division through the gap, swing it east around the open flank, and come in behind the Germans holding Caen. The division they chose was the 7th Armored, the most experienced they had. Villers-Bocage sat right on the road they needed. Take the town and the ridge beyond it, and the whole German position might come apart. What the British did not know was that the ridge already had visitors. Waiting in the trees along that road were a handful of the most dangerous machines on the battlefield, and to understand the morning you have to understand the tank. The Tiger had a reputation that arrived before it did. By 1944, the sight of one, or even the rumor of one, could stop an Allied attack cold. The fear was earned, and it started with the gun. The Tiger carried an 88mm cannon adapted from the famous German anti-aircraft weapon, and it was in a class of its own. Firing armor-piercing shot, the round left the barrel at about 2,536 feet per second and could punch through roughly 120 millimeters of steel at 100 yards, and near 100 millimeters at a full kilometer. It was also frighteningly accurate. In British tests after the war, a captured Tiger put 5 shots in a row onto a target the size of a doorway at 1,200 yards. What that meant in practice was simple and terrible. A Tiger could kill almost any Allied tank long before that tank got close enough to shoot back. Then there was the armor. The front of the hull was 100 millimeters of solid steel, the front of the turret the same, the gun mantlet thicker still. There was nothing clever about it, no fancy slope, just brute thickness laid on flat. A British Cromwell's 75mm gun could hammer away at the front of a Tiger all day and watch its shots bounce off like gravel. Only 1 tank in the British column that morning could reliably kill a Tiger from the front, a Sherman fitted with a British 17-pounder gun called the Firefly, and there were very few of them. All of that protection and firepower came at a price, and the price was weight. The Tiger weighed about 57 tons, enormous for its day, and everything about it strained under that load. A 700 horsepower Maybach engine hauled it to around 28 miles an hour on a good road. But it drank fuel, it wore out its own transmission, and it could barely manage 120 miles before it needed more. Bridges buckled under it. Recovering a broken one took another Tiger or 2, and it was rare. Germany built only about 1,347 of them across the entire war, while the Allies turned out Shermans by the tens of thousands. Every Tiger was a hand-built weapon that Germany could not easily replace, which is exactly why so few of them were holding that ridge. The unit in the trees was the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, and it had only just arrived. Getting there had been its own ordeal. Allied aircraft owned the sky over France by day, so the Tigers had crawled toward Normandy mostly at night, and the road march punished them. Engines overheated, tracks through, final drives failed. Of the 14 tanks that were supposed to be in the second company, only about 6 were still running by the morning of the 13th. Numbers on paper meant nothing. What mattered was the handful of machines that had survived the trip and the men inside them. The company was led by a 30-year-old officer named Michael Wittmann, and he was already famous. On the Eastern Front, he had been credited with more than 100 tank kills, a total that made him a hero of the German press and earned him the country's highest decorations. Those numbers deserve a note of caution. German kills were often logged loosely and inflated for the newsreels, and much of Wittmann's score came from fighting inside a nearly invincible Tiger against lighter Soviet tanks. Still, the man knew his trade, and so did his gunner, a quiet, deadly marksman named Balthasar Woll, who could put a shell on target while the tank was still moving, something most gunners could not do. That morning, Wittmann was watching the British column through his vision blocks, and he could see it was strung out, halted, and blind. He decided to attack alone. Rather than wait to gather his scattered company, he took his single Tiger down onto the road and drove straight at the head of the enemy column. The first the British knew of it was a voice breaking radio silence, a sergeant of the Rifle Brigade shouting a warning that came far too late. "There is a Tiger," he said, "running alongside us, 50 yards away." What followed was less a battle than a slaughter. Wittmann's first shots knocked out a tank at the rear of the group up on point 213, then a Firefly whose burning wreck slewed across the road and corked the whole column in place. Now the British could not move forward and could not move back. Wittmann drove down the length of the stalled line, gun and machine guns working, tearing through the thin-skinned half-tracks and carriers of the infantry, brewing up the light Stuart tanks of the reconnaissance troop, killing the headquarters tanks that tried to reverse out of his path and could not back up fast enough. He rolled into the edge of the town itself, shooting up an artillery observation tank, a scout car, a medical half-track, anything in the street. In roughly 15 minutes, the tanks of his company, most of them under Wittmann's own gun, destroyed something like 13 to 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and more than a dozen other vehicles. One squadron of the County of London Yeomanry lost every single tank it had, all 15 of them. It is one of the most one-sided quarter hours in the history of tank warfare. One British officer tried to fight back, and showed exactly how hopeless the odds were. Captain Pat Dyas had tucked his Cromwell into a garden as the Tiger rumbled past him, then eased out behind it to stalk the giant from the rear, the one place its armor was thin enough to hurt. He lined up his shot and fired. The round struck home and did nothing at all. The Tiger's turret swung around like a slow door closing, and one 88mm shell tore the Cromwell apart. Dyas was thrown clear of the wreck, alive, with 2 of his crew dead inside. He had done everything a good tank commander could do, and it had not been close to enough. It did not end cleanly for Wittmann. Pushing on through the town, his Tiger finally ran into a British anti-tank gun crew who kept their nerve. A 6-pounder round blew a track off the great machine and left it dead in the street. Wittmann and his crew climbed out, abandoned the tank where it sat, and walked several miles north on foot to bring word to the nearest German headquarters. The man who had just wrecked a division's spearhead finished his morning as a pedestrian. The British were not finished either, and the afternoon told the other half of the story. Around 1 o'clock the Germans sent more Tigers and a group of Panzer IV tanks straight into Villers-Bocage to take the town, and this time they came without infantry to protect them. The British had used the hours to lay a careful trap in the narrow streets. Fireflies, Cromwells, 6-pounder guns, and riflemen with handheld anti-tank weapons waited at the corners and in the buildings. When the German tanks nosed into the square, the ambush opened up at point-blank range. A Firefly commanded by a sergeant named Stan Lockwood fired through the windows of a building to hit a Tiger. A Cromwell slipped out, put a round into a Tiger's thin rear armor, and ducked back into cover. In those tight streets, the Tiger's great advantages, its long-range gun and its heavy frontal armor, counted for nothing. Several of the German tanks were knocked out in minutes. The same machine that was a monster in the open was just a big, blind target in a town. Up on point 213, the men who had survived the first few minutes found themselves cut off, out of radio contact and out of options. The lead squadron's crews, along with the infantry beside them, were surrounded through the morning, and a breakout attempt in the afternoon failed under German shelling. Their commanding officer, Viscount Cranley, was taken prisoner with most of his men. 5 of the captured riflemen were shot by their guards. For the sharpshooters, a cavalry regiment with a long and proud history, the 13th of June came close to erasing them in a single day. By evening, the arithmetic was grim on both sides but clear in its meaning. The British had lost somewhere between 23 and 27 tanks that day, along with a similar number of other vehicles, and more than 200 men killed, wounded, or taken prisoner, many of them captured up on point 213. The Germans had lost tanks too, perhaps 8 to 15 including several Tigers, though a number of those were later repaired and returned to service. What mattered was the ground. The commander of the British brigade, seeing his position exposed and his spearhead shattered, ordered a withdrawal. The desert rats pulled out of Villers-Bocage that night and gave up the salient within days. The right hook had failed. Caen, the city that was supposed to fall on the first day, would not fall until July. The German propaganda machine seized on the morning and never let go. In the retelling, one heroic tank commander had single-handedly destroyed an entire British Armoured Division, and Wittmann's name was splashed across the newsreels within days. The truth is more complicated and, in its way, more interesting. The morning ambush was a genuine feat of nerve and gunnery, and Wittmann earned his place in it. But he did not fight alone. Other Tigers and their commanders did much of the killing, and the British disaster owed as much to their own mistake. A division spearhead strung out and halted in a narrow lane with no room to fight, as it did to any one man. Historians who have gone back through the records call the story of the lone Tiger largely a myth, remarkable and real at its core, then swollen out of all proportion by a country hungry for heroes. The Tiger itself has suffered the same fate, remembered as something closer to a legend than a machine. It was a superb weapon in the right ground, and the men who faced it never forgot the fear of it. But it was also heavy, thirsty, mechanically fragile, and desperately rare, and wars are not won by a handful of perfect machines. They are won by the thousands of good enough ones that keep rolling off the line. Germany built its Tigers by the hundreds while the Allies built their Shermans by the tens of thousands, and in the end the arithmetic was never really in doubt. Michael Wittmann did not live to see it. Less than 2 months after Villers-Bocage, on the 8th of August 1944, his Tiger was caught in the open south of Caen during another British attack. The turret was blown clean off, and Wittmann and his entire crew were killed inside. To this day nobody is certain whose shot did it. A British Firefly gunner and a Canadian tank regiment both have a claim, and the records that might have settled it were lost. His body lay in an unmarked field grave for nearly 40 years before it was found and identified, and he was finally buried in a German war cemetery in Normandy, a few miles from the road where, for 15 minutes on a summer morning, one tank and its crew had seemed unstoppable. He was 30 years old. The road is quiet now. The hedges have grown back.